Welcome back to Breathingspace, the quietest corner of the internet. I'm Sam Jarvis. I'll be your guide tonight as you sink deep into relaxation and allow part 3 of Amalfi Coast Mysteries to transport you to the stunning southern Italian coast, where avid traveller Ava is intent on discovering precisely who baited her with the mysterious clue that was left beneath her pillowcase when she first arrived at her hotel, and just why they saw fit to. Before we tuck up into tonight's mystery, why not take a moment to wind down from the day? Come to rest in a comfortable position, let your body settle back into alignment, and if you're feeling ready, welcome a deep breath in through your nose and sigh out through your mouth. Take a moment to breathe here, to simply be. This is your time to rest, to relax, and release tension after another long day. With that in mind, I invite you to draw another deep breath in through your nose. And as you sigh out through your mouth, let the tension that has wound its way into your mind and muscles drain from you on the tide of your out-breath. Breathe in, hold it for just a moment to feel your chest opening out, and sigh out in relief as your stomach softens. Tonight, there is nothing but relaxation, release, and relief. Inhale and exhale, feeling your muscles melt into the soft cushions beneath you. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth as the tension in your shoulders finally relents, and you feel them coming to settle on the soft mattress beneath you. Feel your thoughts soften, your feelings too. Tonight you are sinking deeper and deeper into relaxation, until it feels almost as though you are drawing that deep state of calm in and out with each cycle of your breath. So breathe deep, let the stillness and serenity of this moment flow through you, and if you're feeling ready, tonight's story can begin. The clue that had rather mysteriously been set underneath Ava's pillow before her arrival had led her to the hotel library. The library seemed at odds with the rest of the hotel, which had wide windows flung open on their hinges and bright billowing curtains with upholstery to match the hotel's bright light design. The library Ava found herself in that evening was dimly lit. It was sleepy, and with each passing moment, she found that the deep cushions laid out in the reading nook looked more and more inviting. She would make sure to return before the end of her stay so that she could curl up there with a good book and a peppermint tea. The hotel was surely quiet enough, and none of the other guests had even made mention of a library, so Ava doubted that anyone would notice if she drifted off to sleep in the nook one day. The crushed velvet curtains drawn across the windows were a deep cherry red in the library, and the top of each bookshelf vaulted toward the ceiling. There was something a little gothic about the design of the space, Though not typically one to read Architect's Digest, Ava did consider herself a fan of all things Gothic. And though she herself preferred to wear bright silks and fill her home with the colourful bits and baubles she had picked up on her travels, she rather liked the maximalism that went along with Gothic architecture. Ava also liked to imagine other adults several hundred years ago, suggesting that the addition of a miniature winged goblin to the corners of a building's facade might be the thing to really elevate the design. There were stone gargoyles mounted in all four corners of the library, and though they were designed to look like frightful beasts, Ava knew their original purpose had been to ward off evil spirits and to protect people. Reminding herself of the task at hand, Ava scanned the titles on the shelves nearest her. She realized that the library housed not just books, but archival material too. Upon the shelves before her, the original deeds to the land the hotel sat upon were nestled between two titles detailing the history of the area. A lone candle sat on the large marble table at the center of the room, and tucked beneath the candelabra was what must have been the next clue. The gold leaf that accented the corners of the bookcases twinkled by the candlelight as Ava pulled the note from its hiding place. At first glance, she was surprised to find the perfectly cut square piece of paper had nothing on it. There was no writing, no clue as to where she might look next. Perhaps that might have meant the end of the adventure for some, for it seemed as though the trail of clues had run dry. But Ava had spent a lot of her life tucked away in libraries, not dissimilar to that one, and in that time had read her fair share of detective series and whodunits. Figuring out who in fact had done it before she turned to the final page of a title, and all was revealed, was in fact one of Ava's favorite pastimes. Ava knew to look again. She checked first for invisible ink, holding the paper above the candle and allowing the light to warm it in case the ink was heat sensitive. When nothing changed, she took the candle to the darkest corner of the library and shone its light from behind the message. Still no luck. The paper remained blank. She set the candlestick back into the candelabra and settled into the deep cushions of a lounge chair to think. Scanning the room, she searched for some other clue she might have missed. All she saw was books, books, and more books. Perhaps the next clue was hidden between the pages of one of those titles. She could have pulled each and every one from its shelf and set about shaking them out, but she was certain it would take her all night. And by the looks of the bindings, more than half were antique and might not be able to withstand that sort of rifling through. There has to be another way, Ava thought, turning back to the table before her. That's when she spotted the pencil resting in the fold of a book that lay open on the other side of the table. She ambled over, only to find that the title left out was a textbook. Perhaps it made sense then that whoever had needed to study up needed a pencil to make notes. What Ava couldn't see past, however, was the fact that the nib of that particular pencil was still sharpened to a perfect point. It hadn't been used. It had been set out for her and hidden in the fold of the book so as to throw her off the scent. Ava retrieved the pencil and set it to the blank paper. She scrawled and scribbled across it in an effort to shade it in, and just as she had begun to suspect, the paper had been written upon in candle wax. That was why she couldn't see the writing before. As the pencil skimmed over the wax and marked only the paper, her next clue was revealed. The red wine is in the cellar, but where might we keep the white? The message read. That seemed an easy enough riddle to Ava. White wine is always best served chilled, and how would one chill a bottle in the southern Italian heat? Well, in a fridge, she had to assume. Ava made her way back to the bright little room she had taken breakfast in that very morning. The ambers and oranges of sunset flooded into the room through the big bay window, and as she made her way toward the buffet table, it felt almost as though she was swimming through the sunset itself. The golden sun settled upon and sank into her skin as she tried to recall which door the waiter had carried the food out through that morning at breakfast. She was only half sure she would find the kitchen behind the little green door at the far end of the room when she pushed through it and found herself alone in a long corridor. Ava followed the smell of fresh basil and rich olive oil down the hallway until she came to a pair of wooden shutters that swung open both ways, clearly designed for a waiter or waitress carrying plates to be able to push open with their back when their hands were full. Ava commended herself on stellar detective work, for just as she expected, behind the swinging wooden shutters was a grand old kitchen. Both chef and sous chef were standing over a stove at the far side of the kitchen, and Ava was certain that they were only pretending not to have noticed her, sneaking toward the fridge and attempting to open it. The door groaned on its hinges as she pried at it, and keen not to draw any more attention to her presence, she decided to crack it open just enough to spy its contents. The bottom shelf lay bare, save for a bottle of wine, an Italian Gavi, and 2 thin-stemmed glasses. She pulled them from the fridge, only to find a note scrawled across the label of the bottle. "Start chasing the sunset," the message read. At the top of the fridge, cheeses with names Ava had never even seen before. Pots of olives, fresh figs and cold cuts were all crammed into the same shelf. Ava helped herself to an unopened pot of olives, figuring that wherever she was headed with 2 glasses and a bottle of wine, the olives would make a welcome addition. As she tiptoed out of the kitchen, Ava's mind worked away at the clue. "Start chasing the sunset," she muttered to herself, turning the words over in her mind. Ava had seen some stunning sunsets since she arrived on the Amalfi Coast, and as the sun set to bed that evening, she supposed the best thing to do would be to follow it as far as she could on its journey westward. Tucked into the side of the Latari Mountains, with homes, hotels, and trattorias all stacked on top of one another, there was no clear path toward the horizon. Instead, there were hundreds of stone steps leading down the mountainside, through the town and toward the ocean. As the sun finally set to bed and began tucking itself between the evening sky and the horizon itself, as though it were nothing more than a heavy blanket to dream beneath, Ava chased towards it, picking her way carefully down the steps toward the sea and chasing the sun as best she could. Night was sweeping in by the time she had made it halfway down the hillside. She was growing more and more tired by the minute. The temptation to head back toward the hotel and tuck into bed might have taken root had the dwindling daylight not drawn her attention to the fairy lights strung across a garden just a little further down the hillside. She had walked the same route just that morning on her way down to the sea, and was certain she would have noticed the lights. The sun bathed the Amalfi Coast in amber gold, as if to reward it for another day done, before it ducked behind the horizon entirely. Ava chased toward it, so caught up in the act that for a moment she was almost convinced she would be able to follow it over the horizon and rest with it for the night. It was Marco, powering up the steps and away from the brightly lit garden, that drew her out of her reverie. When their paths had crossed earlier, the young man she had caught sneaking out of the hotel acted even more conspicuously. "You didn't see me," he insisted in a hushed voice as he hurried past her. When Ava finally arrived in the garden, she was surprised to find Roberto, the owner of the hotel, sitting on a lawn chair staring out to sea as the night drew in and the turquoise blue of the bay gave way to deep tanzanite in the darkness. "You made it," he smiled widely at Ava and came to his feet. "Please, sit," he invited, pulling out a chair for her. Ava came to settle in the chair, glad of a moment to relax after so many steps. She set the bottle of wine she had found down on the table and slid a glass toward Roberto, feeling all the more confused. "I'm assuming this glass is for you," she surmised. "It is," he smiled, taking a corkscrew from his pocket and opening the bottle. Together they sipped the cool wine and gazed up at the stars as the night deepened, and one by one they made themselves known. The sight was distracting enough that it took quite some time before Ava felt the need to ask, "Why am I here?" "You didn't like the clues?" Roberto asked. "I loved the clues, but I'm not sure why you left them out for me," Ava replied. "Ah," he smiled. "We wanted to see if you would be able to piece them together, or if you would even be interested in following a trail of clues." "But why?" Ava asked, feeling even more confused than she had before she started asking questions. "The hotel doesn't take on new guests, ever," Roberto began. "It doesn't need to, and honestly, I ought to have moved on and given it up years ago. But I believe this coastline needs the guests that reside in it, and for that reason I've kept it open and kept them on. Now, we're wondering if you might be willing to join us." "In doing what?" Ava asked tentatively, careful not to sign herself up to anything without first knowing what she was agreeing to. "We solve mysteries on Amalfi," We're something of a secret society. Or we were, but Marco has a really hard time being discreet in keeping secrets. I imagine you ran into him on your way down here. It must have somewhat ruined the element of surprise. It did, Ava smiled. You'd be surprised how much goes on here for such a small town. I know we always are, Roberto said. We as in who? Ava asked. Myself and the other hotel guests, though perhaps I ought to stop calling them that. None of them have paid for board in years. Piero, Patricia, Isabella, Marco, and myself. Patricia? Ava queried, certain she hadn't met anyone by that name at breakfast. Ah, Roberto chuckled. I imagine she introduced herself as Madame Delphine. Oh, Ava couldn't help but smile. We're really quite good, Roberto insisted, but a few weeks before you arrived, we stumbled upon a map, an old one that none of us can make sense of. Some of the ink has bled and we want to know where it leads. We've a good idea of the location it will take us to, but the route marked out doesn't make any sense, he shrugged, pulling the map from his pocket and unfolding it in front of Ava. The calligraphy alone would have been enough to show Ava how old the map was. That's why I accepted your booking, Roberto said. Normally I decline them all. I keep meaning to take the website down, but I'm not very good with that sort of thing, and I don't know how. I saw your booking and I thought we could use the help. Then we met you and we thought for certain you could help us. Just look at how easily you found your way here. Ava didn't tell Roberto that in comparison to many of the books she had read, the clues he set out for her had seemed rather rudimentary. She took her time to study the map, and when he could no longer take the silence, he added, "We also have a book club, if that's something you'd be interested in. But mostly we read Italian titles, so you might need to brush up. I'm sure Piero wouldn't mind helping you. He has a wonderful way with words." It sounds like an adventure, Ava smiled up at him at last. The book club? He asked. No, we'd like to keep it very tame. We meet every other Wednesday. I can get you a copy of the reading list if you like. The mystery solving, Ava clarified. Count me in, she said, draining the last of her wine and setting the glass back down on the table. In that case, we meet back here at midnight tomorrow, Roberto beamed. The pair ambled back up the steps together, pausing every few minutes to take a breath and cool down beneath the starlight. By the time they reached the terrace at the back of the hotel, Ava was more than ready for sleep. Roberto held the door open on its hinges for her, and as she made her way across the lobby toward her suite, she was sure she could still feel his eyes upon her. When she turned to check, his cheeks stained red, and he called out to her, "Rest well, Ava. We have a mystery to solve tomorrow." "You too," she smiled and turned on her heel toward bed. The cushions were deep, the blankets soft and the mattress even softer as Ava settled in to sleep that night. And after a long day chasing clues, Ava found herself more than a little in need of a restful night's sleep.